Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today on School Matters, a podcast produced by the Dearborn Public Schools. I'm your host, David Mustonen. I'm also the Director of Communications for the Dearborn Public Schools. We appreciate everybody taking a few minutes to sit and join us today and listen to a little bit about what goes on in our district. Joining me today is our Supervisor of Health, Safety, and Security, Mr. John Leacher. John, thank you so much for stopping by, taking a few minutes to chit-chat with us today here.
Always a pleasure, Dave. Thanks for having me.
You know, John, school safety is always kind of something that's on everybody's mind. But it obviously, when certain events happen, whether they be local or even throughout the country, it kind of brings it all to the forefront again. And we want to take just some time here today to kind of review with everybody the plans, the procedures, the process, the equipment, things that we have in place in the Dearborn Public Schools to help keep our kids safe. John, it's never just one thing, right? It's a layered approach.
Absolutely.
And I think that we kind of tend to focus on one particular thing when there's, so for example, a school shooting. Then we are very focused on that level of security and safety. However, there's much more that goes on in the school district to keep kids safe. And I think it's important to touch on all of those things. So, for example, just for severe weather, tornadoes, storms, fire. Those are emergencies that happen in schools, and we have to be prepared for those as well.
Absolutely, Dave. And what we do to make sure that we're prepared for those, like with the instance you're talking about with horrific events like school shootings, is we practice. And the state requires us to practice multiple times a year with all of those kinds of events. That would include tornadoes, fires, evacuations, as well as lockdown drills. So we do that as required by law.
So that's why we have to practice at every school throughout the year.
Yeah, absolutely.
John, the other part of this too is it's important to kind of figure out how are kids notified in the school. So how do kids know that we're doing a tornado drill or we're doing a lockdown drill or we're doing a fire drill within the school? Is there some type of system installed in the schools?
Oh, sure. Yes. So we've spent a lot of time investing in a system called CareHawk, and the CareHawk system is a multi-purpose system that can be used to do any number of different things. It can make general announcements to students. These units are in classrooms. They're in hallways. The ability for the administrator to interrupt, if necessary, with an important message. Could be to lockdown, which would also be not just a verbal message, but also a display message on the CareHawk device. The audible ability to reach an individual teacher to ask a student to come to the office because mom and dad are there to pick him or her up. That's also one of the features of this system as well. But the overall general part of the system that I think I like the best is that you can have messages that are pre-recorded, that so if there's a lockdown and we need to basically shelter in place and lock down, lock doors, keep everybody out, that message can go out universally amongst the whole student body. This system also has the ability, you mentioned weather events, that if we had a tornado warning that would affect the entire district, we can put a message out that will hit every one of our clocks at the same time district-wide. So the entire district hears the same message at exactly the same time.
So if I walked into any one of our Dearborn Public Schools, I should be able to see this CareHawk. What would I look for? What would I see if I was a parent walking in? How would I know the CareHawk system, that notification system's there?
Yeah, that's a great question, because on a day-to-day basis, you'd walk inside and you would see clocks you say, oh, the district spent a lot of money on new digital clocks, and that's not what they are. They are clocks, but they are also that's exactly what that system is. So in the event of an emergency or an important notice that needed to go out to the student body, to our staff, there would be that clock display would be replaced with a written message. It could be you can import images to go along with your messages and customize them, so each building can make them unique to their own, which is kind of cool. But also that ability to have that audible message that goes out as well. So the audible with the visual, and in an emergency, there's going to be also flashing lights. So we're doing everything we can to try to appeal to as many senses as possible and get people's attention.
So there you go. So that's just one of those other tools that we have to help make the schools safer. As part of our emergency plans, we have this CareHawk system delivering messages to individual classrooms, to an entire building or entire district, whether it be an emergency message about a weather emergency or something more serious such as a lockdown.
Absolutely.
Great. That really sounds like a very effective tool to help us as we, try to put together a comprehensive safety plan. So we talked a little bit about the different drills that we practice, tornado and fire drills, things like that. And you mentioned lockdown, and we mentioned that this CareHawk system has a way of putting messages up for a lockdown. Explain maybe a little bit about the different, because we have different types of lockdown. We have a soft lockdown, we have a hard lockdown, and there's different types of lockdowns for different situations, correct?
Yes. So a soft lockdown, as you mentioned, is we have an issue in the school community that we just want to make sure that our students are safe inside the building. So everyone would be called inside if they're outside. They would go to their classes. They would lock classroom doors, ensure that all exterior doors are locked, and then go on with business as usual. Because there's no direct immediate threat to the building, but there could be a situation the police department's dealing with, say, in the area where they're looking for someone that they're trying to arrest who may potentially pose a threat to our students or our staff if they were outside the building.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's basically what a soft lockdown is. So if you proceed then to what a hard lockdown would be, a hard lockdown is basically there is an emergent, immediate threat to the safety and well-being of our students and our staff, and that is when we lock down classes, we pull shades on windows, we do what we can to make ourselves an invisible target and make ourselves basically as protected as possible from the threat that is immediately affecting that building and that staff.
And we'll expand on that a little bit further when we start talking about the different trainings that we're doing and some of the more popular ones that are out there. With Alice training is a very popular right now, a buzzword that we hear a lot. But before we get to that, again, I want to talk about building those relationships. And one of the great resources and another tool that we have available to us is our school resource officer, or SROs. I think if you go into a school, you'll probably hear that term more often, an SRO. An SRO was there. That's a school resource officer. These are full-blown Dearborn police officers who are permanently assigned to schools in Dearborn, all of the schools in Dearborn. I think that's an important distinction too, that they serve all the schools, public, private, parochial schools. But we have that tool available to us. And explain how that plays into our overall emergency plans.
So I'll use recent events to kind of illustrate this, if that's okay.
Perfect.
So we recently received threatening messages that have made it to our student body and or our community as a whole. Many of those threatening messages were posted on social media. Many of those threatening messages weren't even directed at our school district. But because we have the relationship we have with our police department, as soon as we get word of them, Dr. Maleko, our superintendent, has a 24/7 line to the chief of police. he's able to contact him immediately. When he does, there's immediate action taken. Also, what's happening at that time, I'm probably on the phone with our SRO Sergeant Scazilas, or Captain Shaheen, who's the captain of the Investigative Services Bureau for the Dearborn Police Department, who have also told me contact us anytime 24/7. I just need to emphasize here, those kinds of relationships, those are not always as common as you might think. We are incredibly fortunate to have that connectivity to our police department. And what that does for us is that allows them the ability to jump on an investigation into those types of potential things that could affect our school community immediately. And they do immediately. Recent events around our district have resulted in some perpetrators being identified within a matter of a couple hours. That's incredible police work. That includes sometimes pulling search warrants and doing things that I can tell you from law enforcement experience behind the scenes, those things take time. And if you're not moving quick, like as quickly as possible, and you don't have all boots on the ground, you're not going to be able to get those things resolved in that period of time. So I don't mean to go on, but I mean that is
Absolutely.
a very, very unique relationship, and one that is absolutely invaluable to us.
Yeah, no, I think it's perfectly fine to go on about that, because I think you're absolutely right, especially when you're talking about the overall safety of our students, of our staff, and of our schools. To have that relationship and to have that ability for that quick of action, it really makes a huge difference. And I think that we need our community to understand that, so that they're reassured that when we say that it's safe to come to school, it's not based on something that we just thought of. It's based upon the intelligence that we are getting from law enforcement that reassures that decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And I found in my tenure here with Dearborn Public Schools, and this is a good thing, that decisions aren't made in a vacuum, right? And I think it's great that our administrative team relies on that input from our law enforcement partners and the close relationships we have with the Dearborn Police Department. That if they've investigated something and told us you're safe to put your kids in school, we trust that we're safe that our kids can go to school. And as well as the added benefit of not just our SROs, but because that relationship exists, we get SRO support. And throughout the last week and a half, we've gotten SRO support and an awful lot of road support, as well as some plainclothes support, which means you may be dropping your child off and you might see a uniform officer inside, and you don't even know there's 5 police officers that are patrolling your student lot and all of your exterior, and you don't even know they're out there. That should be an added level of comfort for our community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that relationship extends beyond the relationship between police and district or administration and officers. Those SROs who are in our schools every day, that relationship extends to the students. I know myself, I walk through the schools, and those kids, they know the SROs. The SROs know them. They're at the football games, they're at the dances, they're high fiving them. And there's a relationship there. And how important is that, building those relationships in preventing some of these more tragic things from happening?
Right. So I'm glad you kind of made that circle for me, because I know we kind of digressed for a second, but you're right. And that is absolutely key in getting information, because when our kids trust us, then they're going to talk to us. And that is what is absolutely essential in thwarting these threats and thwarting these from becoming reality. So what I encourage, and what I think we need to encourage our student body to do, is to continue to reach out to our SROs. And you're right, they have amazing relationships with our kids. 90% of what they do, probably not in the last several days because of what's been going on, but 90% of what they do they do just that. I've watched the same thing. I've watched kids, they'll walk right past 7 of us with a badge on, right, that look all official and stuff, and walk right over to their SRO and want to talk to them about their day and greet them and ask them how they're doing. And the SROs, we have a great group of SROs. They have the right character, the right disposition for this job. They soak that stuff up, and they love that, and they truly care about our kids. So that communication piece is absolutely essential to get us vital information that could keep something like what happened in Oxford from happening here.
And that's really what what it's preventative on that front end is really what it's all about. And we want to direct just as many resources there as we do to the other side of things. I think that any school shooting situation, especially the one that happened so close to us here in our own backyard in Oxford, really drives home that point that um, bad things can happen anywhere at any time. No one is truly insulated from those things happening. And that's why, although we have a lot of resources on the front end and we have to keep those resources there on the front end, we also need some resources on the back end. And that's where things like our emergency management plan comes into place. I know that that's been something that you have been working on very hard and working not only on the district, overall district plan, but individual schools, helping them develop their plans. Really, John, what is that? And kind of explain to us what is an emergency plan? How do schools go about developing those?
So, an emergency operations plan, or EOP for short, is that plan that basically tries to cover as much and as many possible hazards that a district could face and ways to mitigate them. So, you start with, without getting into too much detail, you have a cover page, and then you have updates, and they have to be reviewed. They're supposed to be reviewed yearly. And that is what I've been working on over the course of the last few months, is reviewing the plan we had in place, making adjustments to that. And then based on those edits, and I've sent that plan already to our city emergency manager. He has reviewed it and given an okay on that. Just last week, I got approval from the Dearborn Police Department on the plan after they review, which again is required by state law. You have to have a police review, which is great. That should be part of it. They gave their approval, and then what I've done now is taken that district plan, kind of templated it or mirrored it, and then put that into each individual building and given them their own emergency operations plan, which they have to have as well. So their EOPs are now out to their administrators to look at. So what's unique to each building, because you mentioned earlier, each building does things on their own. What we're not going to do on our own anymore is practice how we do lockdowns, soft lockdowns, evacuation. We're not going to do, those are all going to be the same, okay? But what gets unique here is, so who's on your crisis team? Every building has a crisis team. We know, and I'll use Oxford as an example, from the time that first call came in to the time that Ethan Crumbley was in custody, 5 minutes. 5 minutes. That's not a lot of time. I almost guarantee you the closest building to ASC right now is going to take, if we left right now and ran to our cars and started a stopwatch, it would take us about 5 minutes to get there. So basically, things are over by the time we get there as a district crisis team. So the building crisis teams need to be ready to deal with that as it happens. So that's part of the plan. Another part of the plan that each building is going to need to kind of craft on their own is a reunification plan. So that's going to be, where do we go when we evacuate? That's great. We talk about that now. Don't sit still. Don't be a sitting duck if it's at all possible. We evacuate. Where are we going to go? If it's in the middle of the day, where are we going? Well, we need to have a plan. That's part of the emergency operations plan for each building as well.
And of course, those plans, I could see maybe parents saying, well, I want to see your emergency plan, but we really don't want to share those with the public because we don't want to give away information that is going to pertain to the safety and security of the students and the staff, correct?
Correct. Now, I would encourage that when we practice the drills that are part of the EOP, that I would encourage our students to go home and talk to mom and dad about that. Talk to them about what they did. Make sure that it's okay if they talk to mom and dad and say, well, we went to the church down the street. We practiced evacuation. Where did you go? We went to the church down the street. Oh, that's kind of cool. It's only like a couple blocks away, right? Yeah, that's great. And they can help to make their child feel more, especially our little ones, right? Because it can be kind of traumatic with this. And we do things in an age-appropriate way when we practice, but we want to make sure that they're comfortable with it. And mom and dad knowing is going to make them feel better too.
So, and like you said, for every school, it's going to look a little different. Obviously, we have a school like Fortson High School with 2,500 kids, and it's a huge building compared to maybe a school like Duval with 250 kids in a smaller building. So, and elementary compared to middle school or high school So all of those are going to look a little bit different.
Yep. Absolutely.
So that's just one more tool, one more layer in this overall big plan that we use to keep our schools safe, to keep our students and staff safe. This other tool that we use is talked about quite a bit, and this is the ALICE training. First of all, ALICE stands for
A for alert, L for lockdown, I for inform, C for counter, and E for evacuate.
Okay, so it's an acronym, and we hope that people, through practicing, understand why those letters are important and what they mean. So, John, just kind of walk us through this. I know it's much bigger than we have time here for, but just kind of walk us through what is ALICE training? Is it, and why is it just one tool, one part of that overall plan?
So ALICE is a mechanism for carrying out that part of the plan, right? So when we say lockdown, what does a lockdown look like? In the most horrific circumstances, we may need to barricade classrooms, and we may need to keep our kids safe from making sure an intruder can't get in. ALICE is a process of how we do that, but it's from before the event happens as part of ALICE. So the A, alert. What's going on? Are we in condition white, which is typically a condition where we're walking around not paying attention to anything? Unfortunately, we can't be like that anymore. We can't assume that our schools are always going to be safe. If we hear a loud pop, did that come from the chemistry lab down the hall, or is that something that maybe that was a gunshot? Do I need to let somebody know? If we hear something, a loud bang outside, was that a car backfiring? Was that maybe a shotgun blast? And do I need to be alert to those kinds of noises so I know to pay attention, right? So then inform. If you believe something's going on or you know something is happening, you need to inform people. Call 911, call your administrator, let them know what's happening. Lockdown, I skipped the L. The lockdown would be the lockdown piece. And we talked about that. So when lockdown is a complete locking down of the classroom, making sure that students are not in any viewable area if at all possible, if that's our only option, okay? I, inform, mentioned that. C is counter. Counter is, again, the worst possible circumstance, the worst possible situation. You got no place to go, and an intruder manages to breach entry and gain entry into an area that you're at. You don't sit there. Okay, ALICE teaches you don't sit there. You do something about that. You throw things at the attacker. You try to distract them so you can potentially escape, so you can potentially evacuate. Or in certain circumstances, you try to overwhelm that person. And again, we teach age appropriate. You may end up being able to overwhelm the person, that attacker, and actually control them until the police can get there. But again, that is the worst possible situation. But ALICE has a strategy for if you're in that circumstance, you have something to be able to pull from your memory to do. And again, I'll go back to my law enforcement background. You do what you're trained to do. In the worst possible circumstances where your stress level is at its highest, you are unable to think of new things. You can't go, let me formulate a plan here. What about what I'm going to do? That doesn't happen under those circumstances. If you don't know anything or you can't pull from something, you're going to freeze. And that's the last thing that we want people to do. So then the last one's evacuate, and that would be if you identify a gunshot or you hear that announcement go over the PA or over the CareHawk system, lockdown, 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 and audibly you hear, we have a man with a gun in A hall, and you're in G hall on the other side of the building. You leave. You get out. You evacuate. And I think the important thing to remember about that acronym is ALICE doesn't mean we have to start with A.
And
okay, work our way to
wait.
E. Yeah. So it's like if evacuate's what we do, we'll jump right to E.
Right.
But that acronym piece, again, it's part of the training that if I've got that in my head and I know what that means and I practiced it, I can flip through those letters pretty quick in my head.
Sure.
Right. And so then you pick the response that's going to work best for you, and that's what our ALICE instructors teach. And I just want to add, most trainings like ALICE, there's ADD, avoid, deny, defend. They all teach kind of the same concepts, especially when it comes down to the lockdown in the classroom and the evacuation part.
Sure.
The reason we went to Alice is the inform piece is important. It's really not included in an ADD form of instruction. And our SROs and many of our officers in our police department are trained Alice instructors, and they will be working hand in hand with us as we move forward with this training.
Very, very good information for us to have. We've got multiple tools, multiple practice, and we've been doing practice drills, lockdown drills, tornado and fire drills in our district forever. That's nothing new. And that information, actually, when you run a drill, you have to post that information on our website so that that information is out there. And we've been running those forever, lockdown drills and everything. The ADD training we've been doing for the past several years, doing some tabletop exercises. We even did 2 large-scale exercises at 2 different schools, William Ford and Smith, where we had police and fire involved and things like that. I know that with COVID, we kind of took a pause because no one was in our buildings and we were switching over to Alice. And so now we'll see all of that kind of ramping back up again and getting all of those other training types of tools back into place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to note here too, David, that there's every time you do a part of exercising the emergency operations plan, you are critiquing it. You're trying to find out where it's strong and where you need to make adjustments. So you start with basically putting the plan out and reviewing it, put your crisis team together, you look everything over, make sure that all looks good. Then you do the tabletops. You mentioned tabletops. Those are great tools too. And again, our SROs are going to be part of all of this so they can critique from a law enforcement standpoint. When everything looks good on a table, then we take it to the building level where the SROs come in and they do Alice training with our staff and make sure that they're trained up in actual scenario type training so they'll know what to do with their students. And then again, that culminating event is when you bring in first responders and you bring students in that actually help you go through an actual exercise where everybody comes to the table and it's as real as possible, and you really get to see how everything plays out, and that communication piece, and then your first responder, your law enforcement, your first emergency responders, your paramedics, fire department, all those responses coming in and coming to the table at that full scale event. Really, I think for me, and from everything I've heard from the event that was done before I got here, a couple events that were done before I got here, those are great opportunities for everybody to look at that and go, wow, this stuff really works. And that's great. And that makes you feel good at the end of the day.
And yeah, like you said, training, because in an emergency situation, you have to rely on your instincts that you've been trained on and that you've been trained to do, because you're not going to be able to think through in an emergency. And so that's why all of this is so important.
Absolutely.
John, thank you so much for taking some time to visit with us today. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And you mentioned a few times, and I think I'd be remiss not to mention this, but we are very fortunate to have you in our district with over 30 years of law enforcement experience, right?
Yep.
Patrol officer, command officer, police chief in 2 different communities. Valuable experience that you bring to the table.
Thanks, David. We have an outstanding team here, and I'm proud to be part of it.
Great. Well, I want to thank everybody for taking that time to stop and listen. I hope this was good information that we presented here today and helped give you a little bit better sense of what goes on in the Dearborn Public Schools as far as some of our safety plans and the different layers and different tools that we have available to us to help make sure that our students and staff are remaining safe always. Appreciate everybody stopping in and listening for a few minutes. We hope that you check out all of the great podcasts that we do here in the Dearborn Public Schools. Thanks for listening to School Matters.